Bild newspapers, the US president-elect didn't hold back in his criticism. He said the German Chancellor Angela Merkel had made a catastrophic mistake by admitting more than 1 million migrants. He said he thought Brexit was smart and others will leave as the EU is basically a vehicle for Germany. And NATO, he said, was obsolete, although he also insisted it was very important to him. Little wonder that there have been some terse comments from Berlin and Brussels, as our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
They've rehearsed the inauguration in Washington with a stand-in for President Trump, but no one knows quite what to expect at Friday's ceremony, still less what will happen in the first 100 days with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. What we do know is that there'll be nothing conventional about it, because the president-elect has made that very clear. Among his most eye-catching new quotes, Donald Trump says the EU is on the brink of collapse, partly because Germany's leader Angela Merkel made one very catastrophic mistake with her open doors approach to migrants.
I think it's not good. I think it was a big mistake for Germany.
Germany's Chancellor was diplomatically cautious in her response.
Der Kampf gegen den Terrorismus ist eine große Herausforderung für
The fight against terrorism is a great challenge for all countries. We see this as a pan-European and a global task.
Ich würde das von der Frage der
I would separate this from the task of helping refugees. The majority of refugees have left Syria because of their oppression by Assad.
Donald Trump also warned Germany its car companies would have to rethink exports to America. Start building them in the US, he said, not in Germany, and certainly not in Mexico, or face a 35% tax. So what about the most complicated Trump relationship of all, with President Putin's Russia? Mr. Trump will explore making good deals with Russia. As part of that, nuclear weapons on both sides should be reduced very substantially. It's true, both the United States and Russia have more than enough missiles and warheads to destroy each other. And Mr. Trump hinted a nuclear negotiation might involve offering Mr. Putin the easing of sanctions over Ukraine. But Mr. Trump was also highly critical of Vladimir Putin's intervention in Syria, calling it a very rough thing. The bombardment of Aleppo, he said, was nasty, with troops, in his words, shooting old ladies walking out of town. So how to reconcile all that with the president-elect on NATO, the West's military alliance? NATO is obsolete, he keeps repeating. So what could that mean for America's new deployment of heavy armour to Poland to deter any future Russian threat? Germany, for one, is worried.
Wo natürlich gerade bei der NATO.
At NATO, remarks made by President-elect Trump are a cause of concern.
As world leaders gather in the Swiss Alps for their annual Davos Forum, many will be perplexed, even alarmed, not knowing what sort of future we all face. James Robbins, BBC News.
Well, with me is our defence and diplomatic correspondent, Jonathan Marcus. Jonathan, I mean, what out of all the lines that emerged from this interview was most striking for you? Was it the US president-elect saying again that he thought NATO was obsolete?
Well, I think it's essentially the contradictions in everything he says. I mean, yes, he does indeed say NATO is obsolete, but then he goes on to say that it's very important for him. He says that the European Union is simply a vehicle for Germany and was essentially in part set up just to rival the United States economically. On the other hand, when asked about US security guarantees to Europe, he says, I feel very strongly towards Europe. So it's those kinds of contradictions. And one strange little note which others haven't picked up, but I think when he was asked about this question of moving the US embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv in Israel, that's something he appears throughout his campaign to have insisted he was going to do in short order. He refused actually to talk about that any further. Maybe some sign there of a softening his position. But essentially, look, this man was a very unconventional candidate. He's going to be a very unconventional president. And I think people are gradually realising that perhaps he isn't going to change. They're just going to have to get used to that.
What do you make of the German response? Because of Angela Merkel, he said that he had great respect for her, but he also called her allowing a million migrants into the country a catastrophic mistake. He kept saying that. He called them illegals. Her response was very much that we Europeans have our own fate in our hands.
Well, that is what she said. I mean, hers were the most diplomatic of the German responses to it. Others were far more critical. I think the problem, of course, is that in many areas, the Europeans cannot stand on their own. The continent is obsessed now with Brexit and the problems of Britain's withdrawal from the EU. You have crucial elections in other countries, Italy, the Netherlands, of course in France, presidential elections later this year, which similarly could put a spoke in the works of the European project in various ways. And as we saw there in James's film report, US tanks arriving in Europe, fundamentally, whatever the European nations do in defence, and they do a lot, but they don't do enough, it is ultimately American security, American forces that guarantee NATO's defences. And so whilst Europe can talk tough, it is beset by problems. It's beset by the difficulties of trying to elaborate a wider foreign policy at a time when so many countries are looking inward to the problems of the EU itself. Then I don't think it's sufficient, really, for the German Chancellor to say that Europe will make its own destiny.
You talked about contradictions, and Donald Trump is known for contradicting himself repeatedly on many issues. At what point do people like Angela Merkel expect his point of view to crystallise, to become one unified point of view? I mean, the German foreign minister pointed out that he'd even contradicted his own nominee for Secretary of Defence on the issue of NATO. Well,
look, he contradicts himself, so the fact that he contradicts key office holders in his upcoming cabinet is, I suppose, not surprising. I think a lot of the test will be when this government gets going, when we actually see the US Secretary of State, the US Defense Secretary out and about expressing US policy, the policy of the Trump administration. Are we going to hear a cacophony of voices with Mr. Trump second-guessing them, lack of clarity and so on? I think if that is the case, it's going to be very serious indeed. And of course, we've already seen one of the the most positive responses to Mr. Trump's comments today in this interview on NATO, of course, came from the Russians, who picked up his view that NATO was obsolete. They'd been saying that all along, ever since the end of the Cold War. So, he has a receptive audience in some places. He has to convince, I think, America's allies in the West, in the Middle East and elsewhere, that he has their backs, that he understands their concerns, and above all, as I say, that there is going to be a single and coherent, clear policy coming out of Washington. On the evidence so far, that's going to be a tall order.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Marcus. Well, as we were hearing in that interview, Donald Trump also said that Britain was smart to leave the EU and he thought other countries would follow. Now, this comes ahead of a major speech on Brexit on Tuesday by the British Prime Minister Theresa May. Well, let's go over to our political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's in central London. Vicky, how much of a boost have Donald Trump's words about a trade deal with the UK coming soon been for the Brexiteers?
Well, it's certainly been welcomed by Downing Street, I think, as Theresa May prepares to make this speech as the UK looks about its future. She's going to talk about the need to make global trade deals, how she wants Britain to be more outward looking. And of course, this helps her make that argument that Britain is open for business despite that Brexit vote. But I think similar kinds of problems will be foremost in their minds. First of all, Donald Trump, he is unpredictable. Will he follow through with the words that he wants this very quick trade deal? Some are even suggesting within 3 months. He, of course, will have America's interests at heart. Will it be a deal that's any good for Britain? Of course, a much bigger country. Can we really get a good deal out of America? The other problem is a quick trade deal. That's all very well to say that. We know that in the past these things have been tortuous. They have taken years. And then there is the problem that under EU rules, Britain isn't allowed to sign off formally any trade deals until we've actually left the European Union. That could be 2 years away. Downing Street saying today that we would abide by our obligations whilst we're in the EU, although they did suggest there could be scoping exercises. And I certainly know that behind the scenes there are discussions going on, certainly with countries like New Zealand and Australia. So informal talks, but I don't think they think that this is signed and sealed yet.
Vicky, thanks very much. Vicky Young there. Now, 18 months ago, 30 British holidaymakers died in a terrorist attack in Tunisia. Now, an inquest into their deaths has been told that some of the victims might still be alive if local security forces had acted more quickly. The inquest heard that Tunisian officers had deliberately delayed confronting the gunman. Daniela Ralph reports.
For them, the inquests matter so much. The families of those killed. After the anguish and grief of the past 18 months, they now hope for answers. As the hearing began, the names of those who died were read out, followed by a minute's silence. 30 British tourists murdered on holiday. They included 3 generations of one family, married couples and a teenager. The inquest heard they had needlessly lost their lives. Mobile phone footage shows the chaos and confusion during the attacks. The families watched it in court, listening to the sound of gunfire and the sense of panic. The gunman was Saifuddin Rizki, a 23-year-old who was eventually shot dead by the security forces, but he'd been intent on killing tourists. The inquest also watched CCTV footage from around the resort in Zeus. The lone gunman on the beach, armed with an automatic weapon and explosives. And also roaming around inside the hotel, looking for his next victims. A British police team put together this map of his movements. The red arrow indicates where he started shooting near the Sun Loungers, before moving to the terrace and outdoor pool area, and then into the hotel. He killed everywhere he went. There were no clear signs of any police or security guards trying to stop him. Samantha Leek QC, counsel to the inquests, referred to a statement from a Tunisian witness. She told the court, he said the security units that should have intervened in the events deliberately and unjustifiably slowed down to delay their arrival at the hotel. They had the ability to put an end to the attack before the police arrived, but wasted a considerable amount of time in getting to the hotel. These inquests can't lay blame, but they can offer guidance. The families here just want to know how their loved ones came to die in such a horrifying way.
Daniela Ralph reporting. Some of the day's other news now. At least 5 people died when a gunman opened fire at a nightclub in the Mexican resort of Playa del Carmen. About a dozen others were injured, most of them in a crush that followed the shooting. It's not yet known whether the incident was related to the drug violence that's plagued Mexico in recent years. Elections will take place in Northern Ireland in March after the collapse of the power-sharing executive follows the resignation of Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness in protest at the handling of a controversial energy scheme. The Russian performance artist known for controversial protest acts says he's fled the country and plans to seek asylum in France. Piotr Pawlenski said he and his partner were questioned by police about a sexual assault. After their release, the couple left the country. Mr. Pawlenski said they were being framed by the Russian authorities. A Turkish cargo plane has crashed into a residential area close to the main airport in Kyrgyzstan. Local authorities say at least 37 people have been killed. The Boeing 747 operated by ACT Airlines was en route from Hong Kong. Abdulajil Abdulrazulov sent this report.
The tragedy happened early morning. Some were getting ready for work. Many were still sleeping. The plane crashed and hit the buildings of the village, putting them on fire.
I heard a strong swat, and after that all the nearest houses were shaken. Of course everyone got frightened and started to run out of the houses to the street. Nobody understood what was going on because there was a fog. The weather wasn't good.
Rescue workers arrived at the scene to help the survivors. There are children among the injured. One woman is reportedly pregnant, and doctors fear she may lose her baby. This accident shocked many in Kyrgyzstan. Grief and sorrow were in the eyes of the emergency workers as they pulled out dead bodies from the rubble. No one from the crew survived the crash. The plane was operated by a Turkish company, ACT Airlines, which flew under the name of My Cargo Airlines. Although it was a foggy day, Kyrgyz authorities say that conditions for landing were good, since other flights did manage to successfully land prior to the crash. A special committee has been set up to investigate the accident.
Facebook is introducing new tools in Germany to help combat the spread of fake news stories. The world's largest social network said it would enable users to flag up stories which appear to be fabricated. Well, the BBC is also assembling a permanent team to fact-check and debunk deliberately misleading stories. Let's talk to our media editor, Amal Rajan. Amal, first of all, what has brought Facebook to the point where it feels it needs to do this?
Well, I think fake news and false news is nothing new, but we had in the election or the electoral campaign of Donald Trump last year, we had some astonishing stories which went viral, which turned out not to be true. There was the claim that the Pope backed Donald Trump. There was the claim that Denzel Washington backed Trump. And there's no evidence to suggest that those claims, which were part of what we then called fake news, were decisive in making sure that Trump was elected. But they may have been a factor, and we know that they were certainly read by millions. And the point is that new digital technologies like Facebook and social media, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, WhatsApp, have created the potential for false information to go viral, to reach millions of people really, really fast. And initially, Mark Zuckerberg, who's the founder of Facebook, who's very resistant to the idea that Facebook is a media company, initially said, no, it's a crazy idea. There's no way that Facebook could have influenced the election. Now he realizes that there is a lot of fake news around, and he's taking action not only in America, but also now in Germany too.
So essentially, what goes on Facebook is going to need some kind of editing, but how will this be done?
So Zuckerberg and Facebook have always been very resistant to the idea that their job was to be arbiters of truth. They said, no, we can't possibly say that's wrong or that's right. And actually now they've accepted some responsibility for the fact that they do need to do that. They do need to make what we would call editorial judgments. So what they're going to do is in Germany, where there are elections forthcoming, there is going to be a kind of alarm button, if you like. If people in Germany are looking at something on Facebook, they think, hang on, this looks a bit dodgy. Facebook will employ independent fact checkers, they're called Correctiv, and if Correctiv find that this stuff is actually unverified, if it seems like it might be false or fake news, there will be a little mark that says this information is disputed. Here's an explanation. And it's not going to get rid of that content or material from the social network. It could still be read by millions, but it's a way of flagging stuff people are suspicious about.
Right, and the words fake news are still ringing in the air after last week's press conference by Donald Trump. But I mean, what are media organisations more widely doing, like the BBC, for instance?
Well, I think all media organisations feel that what Trump said in that remarkable press conference last week, where he looked at CNN and said, you are fake news, your organisation's terrible, was seen as a sort of an attack on what we call mainstream organisations. And organisations like the BBC are saying, actually, you know what, we do believe that there is such a thing as true news, and we do believe that it's our job to try and find out the truth and to be sort of people that stand up for it. The BBC has long had something called Reality Check, which is a kind of fact-checking service. And last week, James Harding, who's the Director of News and Current Affairs, announced a couple of things. One is a partnership with Facebook to help, if you like, fact-check on more of the stuff that's on Facebook, but also an attempt to make Reality Check or fact-checking a bigger part of news stories that appear online. So I think it's fair to say that the BBC sees itself as being in the front line of the fight against fake news, whatever that may be.
Amal, thanks very much. Amal Rajan. Well, let's return to the big international event of the week. Friday's inauguration of Donald Trump. The new president will take power despite taking fewer votes than his rival because of victories in certain key states. Foremost among them was Wisconsin. Our correspondent John Kay has been to find out just why people there are so keen on their new leader.
Milwaukee, known for its harsh winters, for making cheese and beer, and now for its role in America's fragile new politics.
Go right now!
This is no place for fragile junior ice hockey.
This is the Green Bay Junior Gamblers.
Jonathan is coaching the under-9s. He likes Donald Trump because he's different, a non-politician, an outsider.
It just goes back to an alternative that's outside of the box, a different viewpoint.
He's a billionaire though, isn't he? He's a TV star. He's not exactly every man.
No, he certainly is not. But I think there's something to be said for him being able to relate to, you know, a plumber, a welder, a teacher.
The state of Wisconsin switched sides in this election. The large white working class electorate normally votes Democrat, but this time they chose Trump. They like giving new things a try here, even if it's risky.
Oh! I love your gloves, they're nearly as big as my hands, aren't they? There we go.
Engineer Jason is confident. After 9 redundancy threats in 6 years, he says it's time for a businessman in the Oval Office.
It'll be nice to have a little bit more stability in the job front. So I'm hoping that from an economic standpoint that Trump reflects giving that stability back to the country.
Some of America's top ice athletes practice on this rink.
I understand you like to do this thing, but you're stopping to do that. You're not doing that as much, correct?
Nancy was an Olympian and is now a coach.
It's time to be a little risky.
She told me Donald Trump can bring a winner's mindset to the White House.
Trump makes a decision, he gets it done.
Do you have any reservations about his personality? I mean, the things he said about women, for example?
Yeah. I think everybody who is behind him has some reservations because they really don't know the truth behind that, and they're just hoping at this point in his life he has put that behind him.
Wisconsin may have voted Trump, but only by 1%. And some here are still struggling with the result.
This is one of the most important jobs in the world, and I'm not certain that he's prepared for it.
But hockey mom Layla is willing to give the new president a chance, even though, as a Muslim, she's worried by some of his comments.
I try to look at the bright side, so I think that we have to just wait and see what happens.
You sound to me like you're maybe a little nervous.
I might be.
We heard that a lot here, a desire to unite, but an acceptance that it may not be easy. John Kay, BBC News, Milwaukee.
Now, it's a case that might have baffled Sherlock Holmes himself, who leaked a copy of the final episode of the BBC's Sherlock onto the internet. The fact that it was dubbed into Russian might be a major clue, but was it criminal piracy done for money or something more sinister? Nick Hyam has been investigating.
Please, no, don't hang up. Do not hang up.
Calmly, Sherlock, or I will finish her right now.
The last episode of Sherlock, eagerly awaited by millions. But on Saturday, a copy was leaked online, dubbed into Russian. It was a spoiler, and broadcasters don't like those.
Everything up to this point has been planned with the intention of presenting this programme, this very important finale, as a global event, as a collective community of fans coming together and very much experiencing it for the first time. And this has put a big spanner in the works of that.
The Russian version was widely shared online. The mystery, worthy of an old-fashioned Sherlock Holmes story, who leaked it and why? One theory, the episode was put online to damage the BBC, which the Kremlin doesn't much like at present because the Beeb's increasing its radio broadcasts to Russia. Another theory, it's just somebody trying to make money out of some stolen property. Experts say film and television piracy is widespread in Russia. With Russia, it's hard to tell, and today the mystery deepened when the Russian state-owned television channel which broadcast the series denied responsibility for the leak and claimed it was a victim of hacking. In a statement, Channel One said initial investigations suggest our content system was compromised by an unauthorised external third party. Channel One Russia would like to apologise for any inconvenience this leak has caused.
Save my soul, seek my room.
But who could the external third party be? No one seems to know, and the conspiracy theorists are having a field day. Nick Hyam, BBC News.
Now, a wedding's often described as the happiest day of someone's life, but for one bridegroom in Japan, it may have turned out to be the coldest. This is newlywed Masatsugu Kasai, who is about to undergo a traditional ceremony known as bridegroom throwing. His wife, Kiyomi, was thankfully there waiting for him at the bottom. He was quite literally launched into marriage. The practice is meant to bring the couple a lifetime of luck, presumably once they're back in the warm and dry. Let's just return to our main news story. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says European unity is the best defence following controversial comments made by Donald Trump. The American president-elect has praised Britain's vote to leave the EU, adding he believed other countries would follow. François Hollande has just commented on that. He has replied bluntly, saying the EU has no need for outside advice. in its affairs. That's the French president speaking in the last few minutes. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Karen Giannoni in London.